Welcome. My name is Dr. Sonia Williams, and I am the Associate Curator of Le Musée d'Art du Togo Love. I will be your guide through a series of short tours exploring just a small portion of Togo's portraits of his favorite female models over the past several decades. Along with the pictures, we've added the stories behind them. These pictures are rather recent. That's because, after collecting his older sketches and paintings, etchings, drawings, and pastels, some of which had been damaged over the years, Togo reimagined them as one-of-a-kind digital artworks which you will now view. Shall we begin? Through the years, like many portraitists, Togo has had scores of commissions from wealthy patrons. Here we have two examples of portraiture created sometime in the early 1980s. The first, Urban Nymph, is a quick sketch of the wife of a Greek shipping magnate. Togo retained this rendition for himself while the finished product went home with the buyer, of course. But that is not always the case. The other work, Ibiza Afternoon, is a finished portrait of a prosperous entrepreneur he had met in Ibiza. They spent the afternoon together and perhaps the night as well. She paid him in advance and then she disappeared from his life, yet leaving behind this gorgeous portrait. London Nightclub 86 is a portrait of a waitress Togo had met at that time through an underworld connection who had owed him a favor. Though she was meant to grant Togo a night of sexual pleasure, he took advantage of their short time together to create this charming tribute to Edouard Manet's female bartender in his 1882 beloved painting titled, The Bar, at Folie Bergère. Back then, most female bartenders were prostitutes as well. Can it be that, 100 years later, this nameless nightclub worker from 1986 was no different? After all, she had been offered to Togo as a gift of carnal enjoyment, which may or may not have occurred. In any case, she is now memorialized in Togo's masterpiece, which will be admired by art scholars and the public for centuries to come. Once a Nun. We are not sure about the title of this picture. Even Togo does not remember its history or the model. He can only surmise that the woman had worked in his mother's brothel and he had created it when he was quite young. Whether or not she was once a bride of Christ and had become a prostitute is still a mystery. Lamplight is another quick sketch of a woman who had commissioned Togo to paint her portrait. She was a well-known stage actress in Paris who had posed for him when she was a penniless student, but here she had returned years later when she was quite wealthy and courted by millionaires. Often, Togo kept any sketches of his models for himself and preferred them to the finished portraits. He found more life in them, as he described it, as they revealed a different person, a unique side of the subject, than that in the final painting. Many portraitists through history have made similar statements about quick initial sketches. It can be compared to when a person falls in love with another at first sight. Or, when a famous actor enters into a scene on stage and the audience bursts into rapturous applause. That first image, that feeling within, these can never be repeated. As evident in much of Togo's works, he relishes such moments. Zazie in Cannes. Togo had attended many film festivals over the years and his favorite was always the prestigious Cannes Film Festival. In 1976, Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver won the Palme d'Or award. Both Togo and Zazie were friends of the director. After the festival, Zazie returned to Los Angeles and she and Togo lost touch with one another. He had heard recently that she had been in a terrible car accident in 1999 and died months later during one of her many surgeries. Estella. During the 2 years when Togo was incarcerated, he would often draw or paint portraits of the wives or girlfriends of fellow inmates in return for favors and protection. The prisoners would provide black and white photographs, usually small damaged snapshots from which Togo was supposed to create works of art, and of course exaggerate the subject's beauty and sex appeal. In the case of Estella, he gave her boyfriend a charcoal drawing. Not long after Togo was released, he found out that the man, a vicious pimp, had been assassinated in prison. Togo then took it upon himself to track down Estella and notify her of her lover's death. She didn't seem to care much about the loss. So, Togo painted Estella in a more detailed portrait which is seen here. Estella didn't care much for that either. In fact, the two of them got into an argument which escalated into a battle, and soon Togo found dishes and bottles hurled at him in rapid succession. He quickly put the painting under his arm and headed out into the night. The Sun Worshipper. The relationship between Tori and Togo has been covered in depth in Volume 1 of Portraits. Well after their love affair had been terminated, Tori's life ended tragically in a mental institution. Having come from a wealthy but scandal-ridden family, she had died alone and penniless. Obviously, this picture was created during happier times. Sitpora was an Israeli soldier Togo had met on a boardwalk at Coney Island Beach. Both had come searching for a party of friends, but wound up walking the entire boardwalk back and forth for an hour or so. With no luck in finding the party, they gave up and rode the subway back to Manhattan, where they had ended up in Togo's downtown studio on Spring Street. Togo has said that she was very intelligent, not to mention beautiful, and they had talked about all kinds of subjects into the night. Unfortunately, Sitpora was due to leave for Israel the next day. Though he did manage to sketch her sitting nude in black stockings on a piano bench in his studio, it is not known if they had ever developed any sort of relationship beyond that night. Here we have two sketches of a woman named Bronislava whom Togo had discovered one night after she and another prostitute had erupted into a loud brawl at a sleazy Parisian nightclub. For whatever reason, the artist enjoyed the fight, during which the cursing wildcats had not only torn the place apart but had nearly ripped the clothes off each other. The gendarmes arrived and carted the brawlers off to jail. Later, Togo posted bail for Bronislava, and she then gladly took his money, posed for a night, and promptly left the city for places unknown. He did not entirely lose his investment, since he ended up with these two action-packed portraits which were an odd addition to his huge oeuvre. Elsie was a good friend of Togo's mother and, perhaps even a relative. He cannot recall if she was his mother's second cousin or her sister-in-law or even her sister. He does remember that she'd been in his early life since his birth, so he had grown up with Elsie and regarded her as kin. She was a stripper of the old kind, a burlesque queen, and always had money to burn. And she seemed to him to be a kind and generous soul, and her loud laughter was one of a kind. But, when his mother had moved her brothel to Paris, Elsie stayed behind in New York. She had promised to one day come to Paris, but that trip never came to pass. She died in the Bronx in 1981. Elsie is remembered in several books on the history of striptease. Martha. Togo does not remember much about Martha. He thinks she may have been an art student who had followed another model to his studio one day while hoping to find some extra money for her education. Who knows, this picture may have been Martha's only foray into the world of modeling. A distant memory. Even though this drawing looks to be nothing significant in the works of Togo, it may just be one of the most important in his life. Several women who had worked for Togo's mother long ago have claimed that this is a portrait of his mother which was made by Togo when he was barely 9 or 10. Whenever he's been asked if this is true, the artist just shakes his head and refuses to reply. His ex-wife Barbara once said that the picture was thought to be lost years ago, but when one of his mother's old friends found it in her storage and had sent it to Togo, he became quite distraught and could not function for days. This simple sketch has become another mystery in the life of Togo Love. Carla was the sister of a singer in a famous pop group, which at the time had a hit song that seemingly played non-stop on the radio one summer. Unfortunately, their music was not Togo's cup of tea. His constant criticism of her siblings' fame did not sit well with Carla, and so all that is left of that short relationship is this portrait. Fortunately, the group was what is called a one-hit wonder and might have disappeared into obscurity if not for albums and concerts years later promoting oldies but goodies. Giselle seemed to be just another Parisian model who may have been a prostitute as well to make ends meet. But, a year after this picture was painted, she was arrested in Germany as part of a left-wing militant group intent on taking down the bureaucracy. Giselle was found with a long list of government officials whom they had hoped to assassinate, as well as a list of locations they had planned to bomb. The media reported that she and 22 others were jailed with lengthy sentences. Togo has no idea of her fate, nor does he care to know. Elizaveta was a fashion magazine executive and the wife of a well-known race car driver. Together they had purchased quite a lot of Togo's artworks and promoted him to their wide array of wealthy friends. Togo claims that they had even discussed with him their idea of opening a gallery in London or Paris that would display his work. The young Togo was over the moon with excitement. Then, as fate would have it, the jet-set couple got divorced and suddenly, their pipe dream was never spoken about again from either one of them. Togo suspects that their art collection of his and many other artists' works was divided between them or perhaps auctioned off to buy new race cars. Cantarella and Anita were twins who became well known within the nudie magazines industry during the 1970s. They had appeared together in dozens of publications. The sisters didn't mind posing together while naked, but anything pornographic was out of the question for them. And they refused to pose with men. They were among the few nude models who had still regarded their work as a craft or even a serious art form that began back in the days of the Greeks and has been an important element in all the visual arts right up to the present. Unfortunately, artistic posing had only lasted in the nudie industry for a couple of decades until outright pornography either exterminated the old-fashioned publications or those magazines were forced to pander to new tastes. Video porn was not far behind that would do the same to the porn mags. All of that led the aging sisters to real artists like Togo who hired them for far less money. Cantarella died in 2002. In 2007, an old fan discovered that Anita had been raising sheepdogs in Australia. Togo was about 12 years old when his mother was murdered by a client in her own brothel. Following that tragedy, a few of his mother's loyal workers had decided to raise the orphan to become a decent man one day. Yes, that does sound rather ironic now, but actually the prostitute's motherly instincts could then be assuaged by treating him to the finest upbringing a boy could want. Especially while living in a brothel. Luckily, these overly protective women did recognize his natural ability as an artist, and so they tried to support him as best they could manage. They agreed to pay to send him to a nearby art school. That way he could be properly taught by professionals. But, when he came home one day with this portrait of his art teacher, his worldly wise benefactors then decided that the handsome, 6'2" lad may have been instead teaching his teacher all that he had learned at home. Perhaps, if that was the case, they were wasting their money on tuition. Or, perhaps they should teach that teacher a lesson of their own design. In recent times, Togo has always declared that he had hated art school and had willingly quit. But, the truth may be something quite different. Here we see Judith, one of Togo's favorite models, taking a break. She was also one of the most reliable, loyal, and helpful friends he had ever known. Well, fellow art lovers, that ends our tour of Togo's portraits for today. Thank you for coming to our current exhibition here at Le Musée d'Art du Togo Love. If you'd like to see and hear more tours in our free ongoing series, we invite you to do so. Now then, you may exit the gallery through the doorway to your left. Have a good day.